When you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you must not learn to imitate the abhorrent practices of those nations. No one shall be found among you who makes a son or a daughter pass through fire, or who practices divination, or is a soothsayer, or an augur, or a sorcerer, or one who casts spells, or who consults ghosts or spirits, or who seeks oracles from the dead. For whoever does these things is abhorrent to the Lord. It is because of such abhorrent practices that the Lord your God is driving them out before you. You must remain completely loyal to the Lord your God. So this is an unusual scripture passage for today, for any time to preach on, but it is Halloween. So I was looking for a passage that talked about Halloweeny images. So I'd like to take a second and just talk about the history of this passage. We are not really sure how the Hebrew people came into being as one united people, as the Hebrew people. But it's believed that they were a nomadic group of people loosely affiliated. And this passage kind of alludes to that when you come into your land, so they were traveling around, and in this passage they're settling in this promised land. So when you come into this land, I want you to be unique. And so that's sort of where this passage comes from. We believe that it's remnants of that transition from being nomadic people to being a people that had settled and had a land and a place to call their own. Now, the passage is a warning that when you settle, that you don't settle and become just like everyone else. So these people could move in, just like anyone moves to any location, and just adopt whatever is going on there and become the people of that place. Instead, they wanted to be a unique people. And so these nomadic Hebrew people had their own literature, their own myths and stories. And this warning they're receiving is to try to help protect their identity as a people. They're to trust in God and not trust in this culture that they're moving into. So I say all this to tell this history about this passage, to tell you that this passage is not about Halloween. It's not about whether we're to not dress our children up as devils or as demons or as some scary creature. It's not about Halloween. Halloween is a very unusual thing that we do in the United States and other parts of the world. It's not a worldwide holiday, but it has really long history, and it's really hard to explain to people that are not a part of the culture that has Halloween. When I was in seminary, I had a really dear friend. His name was Costa de Oliveira. He was from Angola, Africa. Came to the United States to go to Candler School of Theology in Atlanta to become a United Methodist clergy back in Angola. And we were great friends. We did a lot together, had a lot of classes together. And one of my favorite things was to describe American culture. And I remember telling him about Halloween. You have no idea how hard that was to describe. Children will come to your door, and they'll be dressed in scary costumes, and you're to give them candy. And he's like, what is this for? And I'm like, well, what is it for? I guess we do it just to get used to being afraid. I don't really. Anyway, they'll come to your door and at night. Yes, at night. And I'm supposed to give them candy? Yes, you're supposed to give them candy. What day is this? October 31st. Well, needless to say, even though I had described it to him ahead of time and even reminded him, don't forget, get candy for Halloween. Needless to say, October 31st came, children came to his door, knocked on his door, and he opened the door and was shocked by what he saw and had forgotten to get candy. And he's like, oh, I've heard about this. I've heard about this. Come on in. So he did the wrong thing, right, immediately. He welcomed them into his home. He opened his pantry and said, here, take anything. I know I'm supposed to give you something. Here, take anything. And so they took food from his pantry instead of candy. I know, it's so hard to explain, isn't it? So he left feeling really excited that he had participated in Halloween. But we think that Halloween might have some, there's lots of theories about the roots of Halloween, but this is my favorite. This is my favorite theory for where Halloween came from. People used to be really afraid of the dark. We don't really encounter darkness. We may have night come. We may turn out the lights at night and think it's dark, but that's not the kind of dark that ancient people experienced. We have so much electricity and so many ways to turn light into our darkness that we don't have a real clear idea of what darkness can be. If you don't mind me telling another Camino story, I apologize for sharing too much of that experience, but when I was on the Camino de Santiago, we would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and start walking to try to beat the heat for lots of reasons, to get to the next place before the crowd would get there, lots of reasons. Get out of town. The towns were sometimes they weren't as interesting as the landscape. So we'd get out of town, so when the sunrise, we'd be out and be able to be in a pretty spot to see the sunrise. But there were a couple of times that I went walking out of town really early in the morning, and it was absolute dark. There was no light from the stars above, and there was no city lights at all. The darkest dark I have ever experienced in my life. And my little headlamp, that was a really powerful, wonderful headlamp, really only cast light in just a few feet. And everything else was, I'm talking dark, dark. And it was really disturbing. And it was really scary. And I am aware that that is the reality of ancient people, that they lived in the evenings and the nighttime was such strong darkness. So it's believed that Halloween came from their fear of darkness and what would come out at night. They believed that spirits would come out at night. And so in order to hide from these spirits, they would dress in costumes so that the evil spirits believed that they were also an evil spirit. Right? They would be in costume so the evil spirit would pass by. That's believed to be one of the roots of Halloween, my favorite belief about where Halloween came from. Now, we have an unusual tradition in this church that we have had for a while now of kind of embracing Halloween. It kind of is consistent with who we are. We embrace diversity in all of its levels. Really trying really hard to embrace LGBTQ community, doing our best to embrace people that are different than us. So Halloween is us being open to diversity in a different level. The reason that that's unique to us is because a lot of churches really are anti-Halloween. There's something about Halloween that stirs some sense of wrongness in some churches. We are not a fear-based church, so we don't have a problem with our kids dressing up in Halloween costumes. Now, I was raised in a more fear-based church. And I remember one time the very worst nightmare I've ever had. I dreamed that this was before I had joined the church, so there was a lot of fear in my family about whether I was going to go to heaven or hell if I were to die that day. And I had this nightmare that I was at my church, my childhood church, and we were running around at night, which was something we often did on Sunday evenings after worship. We did a Sunday evening service. And we were running around in the yard, and there was a section on the side of the church that the street light did not cast any light. And so I was running around that side of the church, and I came to a spot, and underneath the church, there was a hole, and it was flames, like, the traditional hell, and there was a creature there telling me to come on down. I woke up absolutely terrified. And I went to my mother, and in the middle of the night, and woke her up and told her my dream. Now, here's the problem with a fear-based church. She could not give me reassurance from my nightmare, because in her mind, it was a tool to try to change my status with the church, try to do something there. So when fear is a tool that you use to attract people to church, then it has to be the right fear tool, right? And so there is a sense where Halloween is not the right tool, fear tool, and so some churches are anti-Halloween. I am so proud to say that fear is just not one of our tools. It's not in our toolbox at all. And so it was very easy for us to say Halloween is meant for fun. It's a time for kids to play act, so let's bring it into worship and enjoy seeing the kids parade around in church. One of the most fearful times I had on my Camino trip, it's also kind of funny, so if you laugh, I won't be offended at you laughing at my fear. I was walking from one mountain to another mountain to try to reach the highest peak on the Camino de Santiago, which is marked by an iron cross. It's called the Cruz de la Fera. And we were staying at a town that was about 1 or 2 kilometers right before that landmark. But it was on the top of a mountain. It was clearly on the top of a mountain. The valley below was, beautiful layers of mountains, gorgeous. The town is legendary. It's called Fonsabaden. It's legendary in Spain. It's absolutely crumbling stone buildings. And there's just not much left of this amazing little town. Had a long history on the Camino. So I was heading to Fonsabaden from one mountain to another, to this taller mountain. And I stopped to take pictures at this water trough, take pictures of this field of just absolutely beautiful field. And there was a couple of cows coming over, and they had little cowbells, and they were coming over and drinking water from the trough. And so I was stopping to take a picture and to take a water break. And in my pause, I became absolutely swarmed with flies. I don't know if the flies thought I was a cow, like the cows that were right there, or what it was, but suddenly all the flies of the area were on me. I'm not talking just a few. I'm talking an entire swarm was on me. I had sunglasses on. There were so many flies that they were getting in between my sunglasses and my eyes. I'm talking a lot of flies. Did I say that there were a lot of flies right there? So I started booking it. So I just took off. And, these feet know how to go slow because I was really taking care of my feet. But suddenly, I was walking as fast as I have ever walked in my life. And the trail in the mountains were always really, really rocky. Slate rock, just slides, And so I was hopping on that slate rock, going up to Fonsabaden, absolutely bombarded by flies, longing for a horsetail, to be honest, to swat, and feeling rather like a horse or a cow. So I was walking on this, really running, basically, and I passed by a man that I had met earlier in the day. The Camino has a wonderful way of meeting people, connecting, thinking, oh, they're a cool person. And then you're walking at different paces, so you lose each other, and then you find each other later at some place. And so as I was running, I came across this man that I had met earlier, delightful gentleman from Germany, had walked the Camino multiple times, was really good at English, so he was a great storyteller, and I could understand him. And I was looking forward to meeting up with him again and talking with him. I absolutely breezed by him, and he wanted to talk. I said, I am so sorry. I am being swarmed by flies. I have got to go. So I just breezed by him, and unfortunately, I did not see him again. I thought for sure I would see him in Fonsabaden, but I never did see him again. I don't know how I got to Fonsabaden without the flies, but somewhere along the way, they left me, and I missed an opportunity to make a real connection with someone I had longed to visit with. We live metaphorically with swarms, and we don't even see them. They can be in between our glasses and our eyes. They can be right up against us and right around us, and we're really unaware of how much they're interfering with who we really are and what we really want to do. Maybe the swarms are difficult thoughts. Swarm us. Jealousy, self-pity, envy, even hatred. They're swarming around us. Maybe it's these consumeristic need or greed. Wish I had, want, I want. The younger you are, the more likely you're distracted with technology. That's like a really big swarm that our kids are absolutely unaware is invading their life and keeping them from being what they really should be. So the scripture passage is asking the question, in a world of influences that are not yours, that are not Christian, how can you take a Christian position? I'll just tell you what I do and what I find to be wisdom. First, that fear is not the only force in the world. That seems particularly poignant at Halloween to say that. We can laugh and have fun at Halloween in the face of fear because it's not the only force in the world. We should stand up to these unrealistic fears in the world and maybe even laugh in their face because they don't always have a costume on. When we say that fear is not the only force in the world, we could back it up with saying that love is stronger than hate. So what are we standing for as people of followers of Jesus? We're called as Christians to look for God in the world, look past the swarm, and know what's really important. Look for God in the world, and then be the hands and feet of Jesus. Make those connections in spite of the swarm. Recognizing love, nurture love, be love, and truly at the very core of our being believe that fear is not the only force in the world.